Hello, Spacers. Welcome to a fun little Q&A today. We had a crew malfunction, and so we thought it'd be fun to have a little Q&A with a designer with us tonight to talk a little bit about the game and a little bit about our show and have any questions and stuff come up. And just kind of hang out a little bit tonight. So let's just go around real quick. You guys, I'm Eric. He or they pronouns, and I'm obviously the Space Master here. I'm the Game Master for this FreeSpacer show of the Dev Chimera. Let's go over to Ben, then Allison, then Christoph.
Hey everybody, Ben Dutter, Ian pronouns. I play Captain Clark, the ineffectual but very sensitive holy captain of the Chimera.
Hi, I'm Alice, also known as Taffcat around the internet. She, her pronouns. I'm playing Hush or Hushinalia. She's Snake Lady. She's the engineer.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christoph, the designer of FreeSpacer and I guess the void of space itself. And I'm here to be grilled by these fine people about my game. Oh, he, him pronouns. Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I think I'll start off with some of the questions, and I'd like to know a little bit more about the backstory about the game and sort of where it kind of came from for you. When you began the journey that is designing this game, and maybe some interesting tidbits of like failed design paths along the way of this tree to this ultimate game that's live now.
Yes. So I started this design journey, as we can call it, this trip and fall down the stairs of the game design. Long ago. It's been basically going. It started a little bit as I wanted to mod. I was having some problems with gaming, as everyone does, and trying to play a space game using Mongoose Traveler, which was new at the time, and I wanted to do things in a different way and have a different kind of experience. So I started digging around and started questioning everything in the game. And then everybody's like, you're a game designer. You could just make your own game. And I'm like, I can? Yeah, sure I can. I design game systems for a living. I can just do this. So sidelined for many years. And finally we're here. The game differences, sideline. The game started out a lot more simulationist. A lot more simulationist. Like, you're probably like, oh, it's kind of simulationist now.
Yeah.
And not really. I don't have orbital mechanics.
Okay. Yeah, that's
calculations. I don't have star system simulation. Right. I don't have any of that stuff.
Right. So yeah, I was kind of imagining with 0 point gravity, if you were measuring something, like, were you like having like mass distance calculations for failure rates and stuff, and like I don't know, weird things?
Well, not really, but I did have some interesting stuff that I was trying to simulate. I did a lot of different, like, I had a massive system about star systems. I had system maps, like, not that long ago. If you would have played it a few what do you call it?
Iterations.
A few versions ago, you would have seen these system maps were still there.
Yeah.
They were world maps at one point. I used this cool scatter mechanic to like populate and build worlds, but you didn't use them for anything. So I ended up cutting them from the game. That sort of thing.
Ben's familiar with that technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with game design is when you can't take any more pieces away, that's when you're done. So like, it's good to start out with as much stuff as you can, and then just kind of
You can always use the bits and pieces you trim off later for other things.
Make another game.
So world travel or something.
Yeah. So here's a question for you then. What darling did you cry the most when you killed it?
I don't cry over darlings. I do not.
Hard as stone. That's an experienced game designer.
I work in the video game industry, right?
Yeah.
Like, the first thing you might try to have darlings, but then you realize, hey, just a second, this isn't my game design.
Yeah.
This just isn't. I don't get to design what I want to make. And so this was what this was about. But it's still like, if it's going to make a better game, I mean, every time I had to cut like a cool, like one of these cool maps or something, that was really hard. I mean, that's why I brought that up. It was like this cool thing. But I replaced it with cooler things, like the retirement mechanic, which you guys haven't got to use yet.
No.
Really, which is basically downtime actions for the game, came in quite late. And it fit so well. I wasn't supposed to actually put anything more in the game. And I'm like, oh, this brings everything together. It has to go in. And even my wife, who's like, no, you can't put more things in this game, is like, oh, that makes more sense. Yes, okay, you have to put that in the game.
Yeah. So that dovetailed perfectly into my next question I had for you, and then I was going to open up to let Ben and obviously and Alice to have some questions, as well as Christoph, as well as you have questions for us. But following on the tails of downtime mechanics and that kind of thing, you were designing this game before Blades, and so I wanted to know, would you consider this game a Blades hack or just how much of a love letter it is? Or at least just how influential it was?
Oh my God. Okay. So everybody who knows a particular game says this to me, but insert favorite game. Because I stole mercilessly from everyone. Everything. If you're a huge Star Wars fan, you'd be like, you stole those dice. I actually came up with those dice before Star Wars came out. And when it came out, I was like, oh my God, they did it. They did the opposed dice pool thing. What the hell? Okay. Cool, I guess, and it's very different. And red markets, you could say the contract system is very similar to Caleb Stokes' red markets. Mm-hmm. But his came out, I had already been working on my game for 5 years, had the contract system tested for 2 years when his game, when I started watching his little, how I'm making a game on our PPR thing. So that was way before his contract system. So I was like, okay, people are catching up. I got to get this thing out the door. Years later, it's still going. But yeah. And as for Blade, it's like, I love Blades. I go to the Church of John Harper on Saturday nights like everyone else. And I totally would love that. But if there's one thing I wish I could have done more like John Harper, it's create the character sheet first. Because I think it would have had a slightly simpler, maybe more technical, the game really feels, I think right now, like you're playing with sci-fi equipment, but I think if I would have had that first, the game would have just gone more smooth.
Yeah. That makes me think of a character sheet. It's literally like a Lego Mindstorm thing you have to assemble to get working. Sorry.
It kind of is in FreeSpacer, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm saying like an actual tactile.
Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah,
you have to build the character sheet before you can do anything.
Oh yeah, you're building your character, you're building your sheet, and it's like you have to use these resources together. Sorry.
Buy box 7246 of Lego figures and build your own character sheet.
Yes.
Maybe the next game. Maybe.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I'm gonna throw it over to either Ben or Alice if somebody had a good question.
Why hard sci-fi? Specifically, it's
okay. So, I actually worked on a pulp game that never came out. It was a video game. It was one of my first kind of design things as quasi-lead. It was super tiny. It was like trying to save this company. It was called Rocket Patrol, and it was super pulpy. And we had the pulp versus harder sci-fi conversation when we started this game long ago. And there's a bunch of issues I saw with making a pulp game. And it's really good I didn't, because it wasn't too much longer than that. And Bulldogs came out, and then Mindjammer came out, and now you have Scum and Villainy. Pulp is a great genre, but it's a genre about simulating a kind of narrative or television kind of viewing performance more than it is about creating science fiction. And I was more personally interested in, actual fiction that dealt with what ifs of things, and pulp doesn't do that. It takes on the tropes of science fiction without actually usually being speculative fiction, except in certain plot aspects. They'll be like, what if something? But normally, Flash Gordon is fighting, I can't remember the bad
The
guy's
Master of the
name,
Universe.
and dealing with all that, and they don't actually very often go, oh, we developed this technology in episode 6, and now they're stealing that technology and using it against us. That's as close as you'll get, like Flash Gordon. And that's where I would have went if I did pulp. So,
Sure.
What was all the research that you did to get to that point? Because that was the first thing that I was impressed by, and I've remarked on it publicly several times, is that it does feel very well thought out. The world building is really solid. And it does feel like that kind of appropriate level of thinking was put into to make it feel like an authentic, hard sci-fi speculative fiction, like you said. So what did that process look like?
well, like I said, I started with looking at this hacking thing, but when I wanted to actually start tearing it apart, and I tore it all the way down, I got rid of attributes. Like, you can't tear things down much more than that. I looked at dice mechanic rolls and things like that. So I started with the science. I'm like, okay, what sort of science do you need to actually go and do space stuff in space? And I thought about doing the hard sci-fi things that are much more probable, like sleep drives and stuff. But at the time, I couldn't really think of how that could turn into a really fun game. Now it's like, oh, I have all these great ideas, but that's because I've been working the opposite choice for 10 years or something. But anyway, so that's all there. But it's like, so I came out, okay, so you need folding space. How does folding space work? Manipulating gravity is the easiest way. That's the technology. It had a different name that was completely different. It actually at one point was called Ether Tech, which was way too magic-y because people kept mixing it up with Aether Tech, which is spelled with an A. And so I tweaked it, renamed it. The whole book was called that at one point. A bunch of things changed. But I did other research too. Like, I actually talked to an astrophysicist about planets and stars and that sort of thing, and ran a bunch of things through him, which he would have been very confused about probably, but he humored me very nicely. I did a lot of thinking about the logical aspects of that. Like, how do you make gravity manipulation stuff that works in the real world, but you can't just have infinite amounts of it? Because I came up with the idea of inscribing the technology directly on space-time, but then that's magic. So I'm like, okay, you have these anchors that hold them in reality, and then use like quantum mechanics style thing to pull the energy in and out. You could use it, and it dissipates back into space-time. So I cribbed a bunch of science that is, my level to understand, because anything beyond that gets into advanced math, and I'm bad at that. That shit's hard.
To follow up, Ben, do you have a question? But I have a follow up for after Alice's question then. Okay. Then what is your so back to the sort of like questions about speculative fiction? What sort of questions were you aiming at asking? Or what questions were you most interested in?
I kind of bounced around on that a lot. Some of them were in the original settings, because I did have a master setting at one point. I actually pulled it out of the game and developed the system where you build your own setting a lot more. And some of the things I developed with that was with the Anagathics. I had an overpopulation theme, and several themes about the separation between these worlds, which are by nature of a world, it's a self-contained island in space, right? Like, there is a certain amount
of spaceship. It just goes around this.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a certain amount of give and take that may or may not theoretically exist between a planet and space and other planets. But there's like gravitational, or maybe the loss of certain gases, and that may cause life on other planets and all those fun things. But it was always the idea that you could follow the science and find every plot you'd ever want. So the hardest thing about any of that process was how to serve that to a GM who might not be me, who might not be better than me about coming up with science fiction, because I find it hard enough at certain points, and make it so you could, which is why I created the trend map.
Yeah.
Which when I came up with the idea, it was like, I'm going to put literally a scatter graph in the game that you fill out as a GM, and then you alter and change. And people were probably thinking I'm insane, but it worked, I think, and it fits well with the timeline. And, well, I think it's a cool GM tool. I've never seen anything like it myself, but it was a weird, off-the-wall idea.
Yeah, no, it actually is a really cool piece of tech. I could see other people hacking it for whatever that reason. Like, I've never seen anything presented that way for trends, and so I'm actually there with you. Like, for me, it helped me a lot to like kind of like condense a little bit about my ideas about certain like fronts and things that I kind of had in mind as like nebulous threats from my factions and what their goals were, and sort of like why they were goals in the first place. It kind of like I worked backwards from that, and I could kind of see some more trends. Plus, everything we talked about in our prep together as a group, like you can kind of get some cool trend ideas.
Yeah, it's like everything you're interested in. When Alice goes off about cool technology, you can just be like, okay, fine, I'll put that in there. And then when I present something about that, and then I can move it down towards fear later, and it's great. Like, it's just all those little things that players are bringing to the yard. I'm like, I got to track these, and fronts doesn't seem appropriate because I have the Cold War phase, which kind of does its own thing.
Yeah,
and it's like, hey, I need to put themes in the game. The other main pillar that made a lot of the things the way they are in the game is everything in the game is a character or a location or like an odd background thing. Like, you have factions, but they're basically background characters. You have forces, they're like the really odd background characters. But then you have all the characters, like all the agendas for characters, like you shouldn't have to write anything else in the game at all. It's just, I would try to do that really hard, and it was super almost failed many times because putting everything into characters and locations gets a little much. But I think it worked in the end.
Definitely.
Oh yeah. Ben, do you have a question?
I have lots of questions, but I think we skipped Alice. I feel like we're going in some sort of round.
No, I skipped you.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Sure? Because I had a follow-up question from Alice. That's why.
Okay.
Laying off of it, and you gave way. But Adam has joined us too. But
hey, Adam. Well, I want to talk about Christoph's take on the Fermi paradox, but that's probably a whole tangent that we can get on later.
Oh, I showed up at the right time.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Calling my nerd cred into being here.
I don't know if you've been paying attention, but this crew is entirely about the nerd cred.
You say that, I just make shit up as I go. Like, and it just tends to work. Like
that's nerd cred, like there.
Oh, I see.
Making shit up is it's like the first test of nerd card.
The second is, what's the scientific basis for everything you've made up? Can you come up with something?
Yeah, and that's when you make everything up again.
And that's what I just bullshit harder, because that actually plays a little bit into a question I had. Do you feel like choosing to do hard sci-fi rather than pulp puts a barrier to entry on the game?
Yes, definitely.
So like that was a conscious decision.
Oh yeah, almost everything in the game, I made what you would call few choices, but a lot of decisions. I just everything. The game is. I've thought about everything to a degree that is probably just like, why are you doing this levels? Like, I just like, why is this going in? Well, we need that for these reasons. And it's like, is that making it too big? Probably it is making it too big, but I want you to be able to do those things. A bunch of things went in because I love doing spreadsheets, but they don't work well at tables. Like when you're at the table playing a game, doing spreadsheets for trade works, but it doesn't really play well at the table. So I developed, that's why all the abstract stuff in the game, the trade materials, the complex materials, the supply, assets as kind of this nebulous thing that the GM can be like, yes, to cure this disease, you need the random sci-fi word I made up. And now you have to go find that asset that may only be available on one planet in No Man's Sky somewhere. That sort of thing. I mean, so yes, I did limit it. It's a hard sci-fi game, but it's also limited because there aren't very many other hard sci-fi games out there, and most of them are really complex.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with that, with Alice's kind of like a counterpoint was that more intriguing to you then because it is so often avoided? Like there's very few games that I feel really go all in on the kind of the crunchy hard sci-fi end of the spectrum.
Yeah, totally. I mean, whatever I'm going to do, I think one of the secrets to tabletop RPG production, creation, design, all of that is to go all in on whatever you're doing. So if you want to make something about gay werewolves mooching with witches, then go all out and do that.
See, now we're talking games that I have expertise in.
Yeah, there you go. But if you want to make something that is hard sci-fi, you have to do that. But it also has to work on the game engine of human brains and not graphic calculators. Because otherwise you might as well make a video game. And I already do that, or used to do that quite a bit. So I had to create a streamlined system where everything worked like everything else enough that it should be intuition. So like you have your core mechanic in FreeSpacer using the opposed dice, it have modifiers, you have charge, and projects work the same way, just you don't fail the same way. And then each project works exactly the same way, but there's like slight differences all the way up. But it all comes down to what you would consider a pretty streamlined thing. There's not a lot of like +2 for this and +1 for that. It's like you got tags and they can be worth 1 to 3 and you decide it's a GM. And you have like the characters, the NPCs in the game are so simple. Everybody's like, oh, this game sounds so hard to run or whatever. It's literally you come up with a difficulty based on how significant the NPC is, add some tags, and you're done. That's the entire NPC. There's a couple other details on there, some stuff for armor, and then stuff depending on the type of NPC it is. But even that, I kind of wish it was a little more streamlined. One of the things I did is I went through and said how you make up like a swarm or a squadron of shuttles or that sort of thing. But in reality, those are the same thing. They work exactly the same way. I explain them separately because when I try to explain them together, it was harder to understand. So it was all kind of based on that. I don't know what question I'm even answering anymore. Sorry.
No,
Tangents.
We want to just make you talk. That's all this is about.
We will just continue to dissect your brain.
We have ways of making you talk.
Also, welcome, Adam. You want to
Do you
introduce
have any
yourself?
questions?
I mean, do I want to introduce myself is a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Adam. I've been having an extremely interesting several months. But right now I'm working with Chris Bennett on an On Guard Musketeers role-playing game, and that's making me happier. So I'll take what I can get. And in On Guard, like I hear you talk about NPCs. In our game, you don't make NPCs. Like here's the list, and that's the whole list. And there's nobody else because it's just so hard. Because you talk about, all you have to do is choose this and then choose these things, but it still feels a little bit much. And I know I've talked to Sage about kind of Dungeon World ideas about easier monster creation. Mm-hmm. And he's gotten down to the point where he's like, I mean, just tell me how many D6 are attached to this monster. And that's like, it's the same kind of idea. How difficult is this thing plus what is attached to it? And that still feels like, can I get it any easier? But in my experience in game design, at some point you can streamline too far and you've lost a bunch of, kind of the narrative heart of the game. And, I don't know if you could reduce NPC creation beyond they have to be difficult, they have to have tags. as long as that feeds back into the game, like at some point you have to deal with just a little bit that you can't file away or the game loses it. So
Yeah, I mean, NPCs need a name and 3 things about them so you recognize them. I stole that directly from Adam Cole, so whatever. And then, you know, something to have some idea what dice to roll, right? That's pretty much it. Uniqueness, though, about powers and stuff has a lot of stuff on it. And I've been thinking about those lately. Like, Fate is a great game, and you could get along a lot with just aspects, but there's something interesting that stunts brings to the table. So you have to decide whether or not your big bosses need to have something like a stunt when you're making a game like that. Mine don't, because I wanted everybody to be normal in a lot of ways. Anyways.
So where else have you found that you're kind of as simple as possible, but no simpler, and you're not as happy with how simple you've gotten?
I think trade, at times I worry that trade might be too simple because I didn't build a system to deal with values changes like between worlds. So when I see these awesome like video game space simulators, they have these cool systems where steel beams are worth this much here and that's worth that much there, and that's great. There's some ways I've thought about going around it, but in my game I just kind of did it more amorphously, because to really take advantage of that, the game would have to be dedicated to trade, and it would have to have a very small area where you move between it and between worlds for a long period of time. And the whole idea behind FreeSpacers being these troubleshooters, even when you're playing a courier, you tend to do more trade missions more than just actual speculative trade. So if I was creating a speculative trade game, I'd probably have some sort of like what are those string graphs called, where everything's kind of related to each other and all those. I'd probably build something like that.
A web?
Trade. Yeah,
it's some form of graph. Yeah,
those web graphs. I forget what they're actually called, but I'd probably build something like that for trade.
Right.
And who knows? Maybe an expansion someday for FreeSpace.
Yeah. Some kind of like weird market research thing where like you have to figure out what's going to be in demand in somewhere and then get the goods and basically just arbitrage your way through space.
Yeah, but it's a very different game, and it doesn't work with the base thing about FreeSpacer. So I ended up chucking.
Totally.
I did chuck that idea away. Like I had an idea to build a bigger, better trade system, and I boiled it down smaller. Because
the more mechanical detail you blow up into something, the less you get to do the role playing stuff, and the more you're kind of playing the math game of, okay, let's math out all the possible trade outcomes. But I mean, I haven't seen that system. Maybe you found a great way to do it, and I would be very interested in that expansion.
Maybe. Free trade spacer, indeed. No, I don't know. I don't agree that. I had an argument on Twitter just the other day about whether or not, and they were using the term combat, but it did turn into mechanics versus role playing and the fact that they're a dichotomy. I don't really believe that at all. I believe they mesh together. Is actually a principle I added since the preview that's gone out about set the scenes, don't just run the mechanics. Don't just manage the mechanics, I think is, better alliteration.
Yeah.
Because that is a trap you can fall into a FreeSpacer. I do it. It's one you can run into. It's super easy to do. And so I put it as a principle for the GM just last week.
Right.
Just added it in there.
I have not run into that problem.
No.
I've had the opposite problem of being like, wait, I'm doing too much that's not supported. Or at least from my own understanding. Yeah.
Yes.
I went the other way. But well, that's nice. What about okay, so I have another question for you with FreeSpacer in general.
Mm-hmm.
What was the first type of ship that you designed? Because obviously there's different type of FreeSpacer class of vessels and stuff like that, right? Did you sort of come up with all of them at once? Was there like maybe like one like an ship or like an idea, as we're talking about, maybe not necessarily doing trade and stuff like that. Like, was there a sort of like a style of play that you were going for, and then iterated on top of it, or what? Or yeah.
So, like the gods of Greek myth, they did spring up together into being, but ships did change quite a bit. The ships you see now, their ships are kind of based on submarines, but I kind of came to that a little later. I started with the idea of deck plans and stuff, and was trying to figure out how to do that. And I had this idea of volume, but at the same time, I started looking at component ship creation. Really wanted like component ships, but it made certain things really hard because at one point I had enough simulation in there that changing the volume of your vessel changed some stuff, but it was like super confusing. Like I couldn't keep it. Nobody could keep it straight. It was a terrible idea. So I turned the ships kind of inside out and basically said each area's pre-reserved 20 SUs, which was a system that developed later, but this certain amount of area per thing, and develop the system where you could set up your own ship. So that is the whole idea behind that. Is they're kind of abstract maps. They're not like deck plans, but you guys decide which section everything's in. So when you deal with damage, everything in that section deals with the damage. So if you're shooting at a ship and you get hit in the stern, and your stern includes your grav drive and your sensors and your ship suites and your suites in your quarters and your lounge or something, all of those things deal with the damage. So you get a negative die on everything that deals with one of those systems or one of those problems. So it was like one of those things where the ships kind of totally morphed and flipped around backwards. And they went through so many 3D model variations that Lisa created to really kind of bring those things together. And it was a very different kind of thing in the beginning. But the different flags, the flag idea popped into my brain as, hey, I want to be able to do different things and I want to tell you what you're going to do. More things used to be based on the flags, like character skills and stuff. But then it was too hard to make a new character join a crew. Because like, oh, now you've got these 3 skills and you have to know they exist and they're in like another section and it's a big pain. So I separated them until all you had was pretty much a language and an association based on your ship's connection. Pretty much like you could take a character from a merc crew and put it in a courier crew and it'd be fine. It doesn't mechanically anyways.
Wow. So like, I never even thought about like, yeah, how crews could be transferable. Like if you wanted to change your mission like midway through, to be like, you know what, we're not scouting.
Your flag. You could change it. There's actually a whole like recommissioning kind of thing too, where you can get your ship destroyed and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Have you ever had in your playtesting or any examples of people getting more than one ship, like becoming an admiral of a
small fleet?
FreeSpacer, I specifically designed
Fleet Spacer
pile of things in the game so you couldn't do things like that. Just to kind of make it impossible. So that's the whole above and beyond principle in the player thing is you're outside of these societies. You're kind of trapped in this weird layer of contracting for this patron. If you leave and go rogue, sooner or later you end up getting another patron. There's a show called Dark Matter that kind of displays this in story. They spend only a few episodes where they don't really have a patron, and they kind of always deny that they do throughout the whole show, but it's obvious that they do. And so part of the theme of the show is you're trapped and you're more free than everyone else. You're more trapped and more free than all the people sitting on dirt piles who might not be as immortal as you are. And so that's part of the theme. So I designed a ton of things like that, like getting another ship and stuff like that. You can't really just do it. You could steal a ship and take it a while, but what are you going to do with it? Because mechanically, manning one ship is going to be better than trying to man 2. Because you can't get enough crew members, because you can't just hire, and that sort of thing. Like, you're just not connected enough to anything. So you would just turn it in for salvage and make bank.
Make a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're going to get a lot. It's a lot of cargo. Also, ship hulls, if in the setting information, are very rare and hard to destroy. So you go ham on another ship or something, and that hull is still going to be there. It's just going to have holes in it with people flying out of it. And someone's going to salvage a ship, and some faction, who are the only people who own ships, will want that ship hull to rebuild a ship around. Also, most of the ships you run into are super specialized. Yours is super flexible. So why would you switch to a ship that does like one thing?
Yeah, it's really interesting how the mechanics kind of support that fiction. That's the first thing I like. Yeah, I mean, that's like the first thing I think of is like, how can I dominate this whole sector? More ships. You know, it's like the domain level play, right?
Give me a fleet.
That's right.
Well,
Old gold, welcome to the new gold. As you're gonna go take them over. Yeah.
One of the funny things that I've actually thought of is one of the things I could do in the future if I was making another game based on these is make a game about capital ships. So aboard a capital ship, you wouldn't run a station by yourself. You'd have a team of people, and they would give you all their advantages rather than just the tools and the ship itself.
You could almost do with the tools that you have now, right? You could actually with a capital version, like the game with the capital program, if you actually played as a faction, you would almost invert the game where you start with the contracts of the NPC ships doing your jobs and then what you're paying them, and then having the sort of Cold War phase be their missions.
Yeah, you could do something.
It's literally
crazy like that,
it's
like
the mirror of it's the mirror of the game that is now.
Yeah, there's enough mechanics.
That's funny. Yeah,
build a game like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is like I think there's enough here that like in as far as the back end for the GM that it would basically support that play as long as you just kind of invert a little bit, and you just have to. It's not impossible.
It's a little bit of a job, but the idea that is actually I was talking about there's these capital ships that each section is like the size of your ship or bigger, and you'd be manning these like the Enterprise kind of size ships rather than these little tiny submarine style ships that are closer to that. But your idea for like a faction game would be really cool.
I mean, I don't know what the fiction would look like. It would be a lot. I don't know.
Crazy political fiction. Like an interesting Burning Wheel game or something.
Yeah, you'd be debate. I guess it would just be taking place in a series of meeting rooms as you discuss which contracts are the ones we want to go ahead and go forward with, and then then do that negotiation.
You would need to develop a big
I know that's way too real. I know you're a marketing person. That's way too real. Oh, that's funny. Okay, I like that a lot.
Let alone another game where it's like, okay, but where's the fun part?
That is the game. That is the fun part. But you must like spreadsheets.
You must enjoy the spreadsheet. Yeah.
That is sheet spacer for sure.
Sheet spacer.
Oh god, I feel like I'm playing EVE Online again.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true.
So something I was really interested in, I've noticed that we've always our sessions seem to run a little longer, and our setup session ran really long, which is fine. Like duration is duration. Do you run? You've watched our games. Do you run your games faster or slower? And how long about are you kind of thinking a normal session of this would go? Especially for people that are thinking about the Kickstarter, right?
Yeah, so that is really interesting. That depends a lot on your players. So you guys like to get into the minutia of things, and Eric likes to set a lot of scenes that are like social scenes and stuff, and that's great, but that does make games run longer. So like my home game, my wife ran this whole scenario that was about going out and stealing something off a capital ship that you weren't supposed to, and then leaving with it. And my home game took 5 sessions to do that. 5. I ran that at a convention and had people do it in 3 hours. So I don't know how long it should take, Eric and friends took 3 to 4 hours to do it. My home group took 5 hours to do. Pretty much
sessions to do.
5 sessions to do the same thing.
But like for setup especially, would you tell people to like reserve all day for setup? Reserve, because you talk about Burning Wheel. Burning Wheel says reserve the first session for character generation.
I say the first session is character creation. It should take 4 hours. So the thing is, if everybody has read through all of commissioning, they would understand, like, hey, some of the stuff we're getting into isn't societies, it's factions. So I'm going to put a pin in that, or actually just jump over and we'll make some factions, not just talk about it. Because I find some of the churning talk, which is great info, but it turns into churning because there's nowhere to put it down on the society sheet, because it belongs on faction sheets. So really, if as a GM myself, if I had players do that, I would be looking at them going, okay, that's a faction. What are they called? And just interfacing just enough so they go, oh, all these cool ideas we're coming up with are faction stuff that I'm super interested in. And when we start talking about the Human Empire of Spite and everything, we come up with 5 factions during that instead of just talking about it. And then we're half done the damn game in advance. You don't have to do things in the order I put it in. It was the most easiest order to figure it out. But that's why I put on the sheet, the society sheet has society on the top and all the factions belonging to that society underneath it. Yeah. And they belong to it in an ownership method, not necessarily an origin method. So an alien society has nothing to do with anything. You happen to be inside Soul's space when they took over, or whatever you wanted to call them, the United Terran Empire or something. They now become a Soul faction. They have to learn interchat because that's what everything's spoken in. And they have that in some crazy alien language. And there you go.
Yeah.
So you can make it go faster if you know it really well. But like every game, the first time you run it, it takes forever. Do you remember the first time you see some people make up like D&D characters? 17-hour session. You're like, why is this taking so long? Just roll the dice. God damn it.
Oh man, even Dungeon World character creation is too long for me. Like I'm one of those people that's like, let's sit down, we'll start, and then if you need to know something to roll, then we'll figure it out.
You like your pre-gens.
Oh, no, I hate pre-gens. I just don't care about stuff that doesn't matter yet. Like we're starting in the dungeon, and then I'm gonna hit that thing with my sword, and I'm like, okay, first you have a sword. Second, are you good at hitting people with swords? And if so, here's the sheet. Like, and so it was a big swap for me coming from that style of game to one where the game's saying, okay, before you start, let's build this thing, which is awesome. I love building this thing, and the stuff that came out of that session was great, but we hadn't expected the size of it because a lot of us come from that kind of game where a lot of things exist or can wait, right? And I think that you could probably play this game allowing some things to wait, but it would suffer for it. It's really cool to have everything out there up front so that you can build on it and have all these connections. And I think that if people know about that going in, that's gonna help a lot. So
yeah, I specifically say during the opening, the welcome aboard chapter of the book, I think Adam actually read it on his online first look thing, that the game is front loaded. There's a bunch of stuff to do in advance.
Yeah.
And I said that because of that exactly thing you're talking about. Like, I think there's a gumshoe game that is one of the suggested ways of making characters is during play. And they leave a bunch of things. One of the things that you do leave in my game, you can leave is languages. You can just mark a pip as a language. You want to know a language in this general area, and if you don't, you want it somewhere else in another area, you can just move it between it. Just like I know one more language because my character has 3 specialty in comms. That means I get 3 more languages or in linguistics. So I get 3 more languages than everybody, right? So there's stuff like that. There's certain things that I also tend to leave till a little bit later. But the ship creation usually goes pretty swift, especially depending on how much people care about it, right? And how much you come up with in advance and stuff. So it's really, yeah, it is a front-loaded game, and it's just I couldn't figure another way of doing it and actually have the game work.
It's cool. It's just something people should expect, and also a lot of that can be done online by email over chat. You know, I think it would be an excellent play-by-forum game personally, but
interesting. I like all of that in-person character creation stuff, so that's probably why it came out the way it did, because I like spending a session 0 figuring all that stuff out.
I kind of would really like having some sort of like web application to do this, and then just be like, "Hey, import this into Roll20."
God, yeah. that would be fantastic.
Right?
Jeez.
Like imagine the sort of drag and drop components of your ship. Imagine like having all that kind of stuff. It's way beyond the scope of what even what Roll20 or any designer to ask for. Having a web application.
It isn't. These are plans I have. Yeah. Just fund the game, people. No,
yeah.
But
give me your money.
I a bunch of Roll20 support because I want to use a compendium. It's the only way I can do the ship map the way it should be done. Would be to be able to drag it over. They have the drag and drop. I just need to put in like 5 different versions of the drive that's different shapes.
And then that would be so much fun. That would be
all that stuff. It's so much more tactile. The version I have right now.
Yeah.
Roll20 was a really interesting thing for me to put into the game because, one, it taught me a bunch of problems with my sheets. Because one of the things you can't do in HTML and CSS is there's this cross-pollination thing that happens on some sheets, and it's never a problem because you understand it or you find it's actually backwards. But when you try to enter it digitally, it's impossible. So it either gets left off the sheet entirely or you have to do it in a very different way.
Can you give me an example?
Oh, what was it? I think it was the original way I did associations and stuff. Oh, what was it?
Because I think I know what you mean. Like sometimes between like various radio buttons and drop down things and selections and stuff, you're like, I actually can't do that way if I want to make a dice roller, like using these numbers. Like,
it's there's a few
the way
different
things are stored.
It's like I couldn't enter. I think it might have been a couple versions of the old armor system and stuff that was in there. It was just impossible. And it's like, why is this impossible to do in an HTML sheet? That's a problem. And then some of the ways I could put it in, because the armor went through several different changes, like the way it works, later in the process. Yeah. Because it's actually one of the hardest things to do.
You're like, your
health is hard. It's a hard game design thing.
Eventually, our character sheets will have their own separate model controller view. Just internally inside a character sheet, and it just would be.
Be careful what you promise.
I'm not. Hold on. I just want to be very clear. I'm not saying that's actually going to happen. I have no control over that. That's not. That was facetiousness.
Speaking in your personal capacity, I do not speak for Roll20.
That's entirely. Yeah.
No, I really. I found my HTML is so rusty and my CSS is so rusty. Making Roll20 sheets is quite a challenge. The fact that Compendium requires you have to talk to someone is a challenge as well. And moving beyond these things, but I want to do things like put API stuff in it and use the Compendium to be able to put things on the sheet. Because I think it's the only way it's possible. If someone has a great idea of how you could do those sheets without it, like you could click things all day, but you can't write words in the middle of that too, right? Like it's really complicated CSS that I don't have the skills for. I mean, if it was C#, I could do this in a couple hours, but on CSS and HTML, man, I don't even have variables.
Well, yeah.
Wah, wah.
Anyways, yes, if it funds, I'm going to be adding more things to it and that sort of thing. I want the Roll20 sheets to be better. I want to be able to run charge with them. I want to be able to have it talk about the different things. I wanted to ask you if you're coordinated or not. I want to have those as separate fields. I want the dice to show up looking like something that isn't confusing AF.
Yeah.
Like I have some dice rollers that do look decent, but I couldn't make those embedded in the sheet. So it's either sheet rolling.
No, yeah, or inline, or
you gotta
inline roll.
choose
Yep,
which
yep,
one,
Yep.
because inline rolling doesn't have all the same functionality.
Yep. I've discovered this myself. I know. So like this is something that's it's interesting. So do you think that the platform of Roll20 is like actually in a big way influencing the design of the game, or at least how some ideas are expressed?
It is interesting some of the ways the ideas are expressed. I've been working with Roll20. I'd have to log in and probably check how long I've been a pro member, but several years, like alongside it, I've been developing the sheets at the same time. I was very, very disappointed that I could never change backgrounds. I couldn't figure out why the CSS backgrounds I put in didn't happen, because my original idea for a couple of these was put the home sheet underneath it as a background and then just make all the pieces are floating on top of it.
Oh yeah.
I could not make that work. It looks, my home sheets are so much prettier. The Roll20 sheets are only better in a couple ways, and all my pull downs going to be pulled out when I do a compendium, because pull downs don't work with compendiums because it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, different. Charactermancer went, oh, you know all that stuff you spend all the time on? No, you're not doing that anymore because you get to have actual character creation. Like, yay, but damn, that was a lot of work. It's great though. I really like Roll20. It is my virtual tabletop of choice. I always think though the only thing I would have changed is instead of everything basically being a page, I would have wanted the basic to be a tabletop, and then the maps to basically be like handouts and character sheets, because there's a certain amount of, especially indie stuff, where you want to be able to share certain things you just can't share unless you make it a character sheet. So you end up having many tabbed character sheets.
You can make it like handouts and put them in folders and things like that. Like,
you can't upload a PDF as a handout.
Yeah.
oh well, no, that's
So one page at a time takes a while.
In that case, typically for like indie stuff, I'll just screenshot relevant stuff and add them as a handout.
Or cut and paste the text in. Or you can upload one page at a time. That works. I mean, I did cards like that. I did a Gumshoe 1-to-1 play test with a friend who lives in Seattle, and I did every card. Woo, that was a job.
Yep. There's a few card games that I've played on Roll20 before. That's a thing.
It's a job. It's a job. I see those people deserve their money. I mean, I love you guys, but you need a coder who just goes and makes that easier. I'll hire one just for that.
Ben, speaking of impossible code and stuff, Ben's got questions listed on our group chat. And one of his that I'm really interested in is, this is a very hard sci-fi game, but yet there are a couple of pieces that are just obviously, this reaches a little far, like the sentient AI stuff. And how do you pick and choose? Like, which ones were they? Just the ones that were interesting to you, or did you pick them from specific inspirations to pick from another question that's on here?
Okay, so I have a very good answer for that. Sentient AI is not part of the game. Sentient AI is specifically...
Sorry, Christoph, to clarify, I think that's what Adam is saying, is what made you pick some of those things to be impossible, like...
science.
There's obviously some other things that are not, we pick some science words and say, ignore this for now. Like, was it?
Okay, so theoretical physics makes folding space more likely than sapient AI. Honestly, everybody thinks it's a lot easier in our current world than it actually is.
So your general answer is, everything that's in the game you believe is something that could potentially happen.
Could potentially.
Okay, that's a good answer.
And folding space was required to make it work, the game at all. Because otherwise it's like, okay, you spend 400 years in suspended animation traveling to the system. It's a very different game. I now have ideas for that, as I said earlier, but I didn't at the time. I'm like, how is that going to be a game? 400 years in deep sleep? You're going to get back in forever war stuff's going to be happening. This is going to be crazy, right? So instead I went, okay, so I have to make that one. How could that possibly work? Folding space seemed the most likely. Subspace stuff isn't even a whisper. There's no science behind subspace at all. Tachyons, not really, but just there's enough of a whisper and enough of a thing for that. But it's just like Sapient AI and stuff is all in a little chapter that I call the impossible. And this is stuff the GM puts in the game if players are really interested in it and should be extraordinary and uncommon to the players. Like True Ansible, Sapient AI, Cthulhu-esque creature, all that jazz I put in this little chapter. Space Leviathan, stuff like that. They're really cool. They're maybe possible, but they're a stretch. They're quite a stretch. So I put them in a section so the GM could use them as a major thing in their game that shocks the players. Because part of the problem is if you have sci-fi where the players are on the top of all possible science, it's weird. People aren't used to that. They're used to innovation being a thing. But that hasn't always been true. That's a 19th and 20th century and 21st century thing. Innovation wasn't a thing in the 1700s. Maybe in the 1700s, but it definitely wasn't in the 12th century. Innovation didn't exist. So we need that. So I put in the impossible section and let the GM add it.
Yeah.
Not my game. You play what you want.
I got to head out, but it was very nice talking to y'all. I hope you'll have.
Do you have
a
any
lovely
questions before you go, Alice?
Do I have any questions before I go?
I didn't know you were going so soon, or I would have shut up some of these others.
No, it's quite all right. I don't think I have any off the top of my head. In all honesty, I have a bit of a headache, so it's hard to think of any good questions. I think I asked the main one I wanted to ask, which was about the hard sci-fi thing earlier.
Well, it was awesome to have you aboard.
Yeah, I will see you all next week. Have a good night.
Thanks, Alex. Bye.
And I will fix the cameras.
Yeah, I was expecting cameras to go insane there.
Eric's a pro. He can handle it.
Yeah, it's not my first rodeo.
What's the thing you're happy about the most of the design of the game? The thing that you're like, this is perfect. I will never change it. It can never be any better.
Oh.
Hold it up on the shining pedestal.
I don't know. I think the way that all the game systems kind of work together. I mean, maybe the core mechanic, but the way the systems work together is probably my biggest favorite thing. It's just all pretty well balanced with each other. Like, you guys haven't even done all the different types of projects, let alone all the different types of encounters and stuff. Yeah. And I didn't let it get to this point until all those things worked. And there was a big issue where at several different points, sci-tech wasn't a type of encounter. So I don't know if you've had a chance to actually look at the running the game section, but encounters are split between Discord, sci-tech, and conflict and spaceflight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I would change like that. It's the meta layout of it makes sense. Like Retirement finished off the projects. There are no other projects that I necessarily want that I could ever think of. Like there was other projects, other things had been split and put back together and things like that. And I don't know, just the way those things all fit together is my favorite part.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say, I think last session it was really when we realized just how like if you want to get recursive with projects, being like in order to fix this one project, it has now spawned a sub project to do to get the thing for like you could totally basically run the entire game through projects.
It's the secret weapon of the game. You can it's hard sci-fi, but if you want to do anything, you can do it with a project. And if the GM wants to keep you from doing anything, he'd be like, okay, but you need this asset to do it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the cool things about assets is they're the thing that is the linchpin. It's also the permanent aspect. So say you're asked as a group, as explorers, to go settle a base, to start a colony. So you get a cargo bay with like 20, 30, 40 colonists in it, whatever fits. You have to do the math. I think they're 1 ton per person. So you have a 600-ton cargo bay. Plus you get a bunch of a prefab and a biofab like structure. So you put down the prefab structure, you need that. So you do one project about building that together. Then you grow a biofab building out of the ground. That's another asset. And then you use a construction project to do all of those things. You put it together, you grow a colony, and that's the main part of your mission. And then the GM can interrupt things. Every time you make a mistake, they get interrupted by encounters. And you also have to go around and deal with other things and the other obvious dangers of the world.
Yeah, like difficulty sacrifices. It frankly reminds me a lot of it's like more. It reminds me a lot of Burning Wheel, in terms of how it can be structured and framed. I really like projects. Like I can't emphasize that enough.
I am definitely guilty of that. I play Burning Wheel on Friday nights. Every Friday night that doesn't get canceled due to life, which is It's Friday, bad time for games, but it's when we do it. And I love Burning Wheel. I think it's a great system. I find I want to make a Burning Wheel game sometimes. I have some ideas. Like your meta game, I have an idea for one that what I at one point called Parliament, where you basically would play a minister of a parliament and you'd be jockeying for power. It would basically be like British House of Cards.
Yeah.
Those were always fun. I played a game for a while that I feel like could have been done with Burning Wheel or similar systems better. That was like a play by email where there was one GM type person and like 150 players, and they all were representative of a different faction, and they had all these like secret alliances and stuff. So that's pretty neat. I always wanted to try to design a system for something like that, but I wanted to ask Christoph, what was I've never seen anything that was like biotech life support before, or nothing that really like springs to mind. The version that you have in FreeSpacer, was that like an inspiration from something, like a piece of fiction in particular, or did you just kind of develop that?
I developed that based on the fact that everything that has stuff to do with life makes sense to do with biotech. Like vents and filters is actually a really terrible way of doing that when you could just have an atmosphere generating itself. So it just made sense that biotech would be the way that you would put life support in a ship. And it's probably similar to what it did. The weirdest part I did with that was have the kind of tentacle like aspect to the ship where there's like these arteries going between all different parts of the ship. And I just decided that because I thought that was cooler than just regular vents. In some ways, for relating to players, that might have been a mistake. But you can let players climb on the inside of walls. It's still a possibility. There can still be Jeffries tubes. But you just have to deal with the fact that there's this biomass above you all the time, which is probably a little creepy.
I really like it. It kind of, I cringe looking back at it now, but when I was younger, I really enjoyed the Yuuzhan Vong. I don't know if you ever read the EU from, it was like early 90s to mid 90s Star Wars. There was this.
Oh, no, I didn't read a lot of that.
The Yuuzhan Vong, and there were these like aliens from a different galaxy that didn't have midichlorians, so the force didn't work on them, and all of their tech was biotech, and they all like terraformed, and their ships were living creatures, and you know, it's like StarCraft Zerg or something similar to that, or Tyranids to some extent. But yeah, I just like that you have like a sliver of it in here as like of course that's a logical thing. Like, why improve upon an organic process for organic meat bags in space? Like, why not just do the thing that nature does really well?
Yeah, and I think it's probably a possibility, and exactly is why I put it in there, because I think that's probably what they're going to do, something like that. I mean, we've got the biotech age in the game of our real life right now is beginning. I used to have a history, a master timeline And that is one of the biggest things I threw away. That's one of the darlings that Eric asked me about. So I threw away a master timeline starting in our current age and going all the way till the future, which included things like biocap things that would actually bring you into computers and that sort of thing and all this crazy stuff. But the reason I didn't do biotech ships is because biology's bad in space. Totally. It just seems like a terrible idea.
Well, I mean, philosophically, biology's bad at everything. Except maybe like its original intention of like sucking on hydrothermal vents. Just like
living on worlds and doing stuff like that, like bio buildings and stuff makes sense. But
yeah, this is cool. So, I wanted to talk to you something else, gravitating a little bit away from the fiction of the setting for a minute. I have a question about the mechanics and stuff. Because I know we ran into this a little bit at the start, and it was sort of like, how do we help each other in our roles? And why it ended up becoming more like, when you help someone, you do a separate setup action. And like, kind of like, so like every role is very, very individual.
Okay, so I did 7+ aid styles in this game. And so the biggest problem with just you get one die burning wheel style is you just always get one die burning wheel style. So you just like, why wouldn't you help? Well, then you also can get hurt or also have the problem. But that usually in the stuff you help with, that's not a thing. And if your friend's going to be chased by the mafia, what's the difference between you and your friend being chased by the mafia? It just doesn't have a big impact. So I was like, okay, that doesn't really work. And I tried it, and everybody was always helping each other, and it just didn't make any sense. And there were players who just gave out dice, and it was just like, now you're not being spotlit at all. And so I went to, okay, you can always help each other. It just has no mechanical effect. Because really, how much help is your friend holding a damn ladder to put in a light bulb, really? Like, it's not really a big thing. Like, you can help me with electronics, but unless you actually do something, it's just you standing there being nice to me, which is great. Makes me feel good, but I could do it just as easy by myself. Maybe slightly harder because I have big hands, but okay, I'd still get the computer built. So the big question is, how do you actually help each other? And it came down to, you can actually change how things are. So say you want to help me build a computer. You do a task where you clean up my entire workstation. You put in new LED lights everywhere. You get me a bunch of tools so that I can take my big hands, put them in a computer. I don't have to because I get some tools to do it for me. Now you're helping me. So helping in this game is a support action that puts a tag on the scene, the location, the individual that's helping them. And it worked really well with scanners, and that's what it needed to work with. It worked really well with piloting because it really needed to do that. Half the time, the sensor analyst and the pilot just put tags on things. They're the fate move where you tag something and make it possible, right? So they put tags on things. So if they roll 2 complete, the tags are there the whole time. They have a route. They have a permanent lock onto the ship. They have they understand the behind the other ship thing, whatever. And if you roll a 1, you have a one-use 1. And it works for all that sort of thing. So in that scenario I was talking about with you that you ran, that we played at GoPlay, they had to do a support roll with the pilot to basically, or with the sensors, to map a route through the giant wave that was coming through the very slow explosion of basically a giant scrapyard in space and asteroid belt put together. And so it was thickening up and it was going to be hard to move. So whoever was a sensor analyst, plotted a route, which is like the most obvious support task, which is one of the reasons I like the wave phenomenon thing. And then the support works. Every other version I tried was just either cheap or didn't really work very well. So that's why I came out with this one. Maybe there's a better one, but I couldn't figure out what it would be. So I just have to be harsh on it. Once people get it, they're just like tag, 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 tag.
It's really cool put that way. I hadn't connected it to fate. And I think, We have more sessions, and I'm going to be pulling it out. Have you played Diaspora, Christoph?
I read Diaspora.
That was the first Fate game that I actually played. And that's
the one with no capital letters in it, right?
Yeah.
I was like, that was the weirdest book in some ways. Like their mapping system, they did the small, short, like basically star system where you had a bunch of planets kind of system, smaller space game. And the game was really neat. I still think a little bit top-down organization, like in the next edition, would be really nice. It
was very Fate, right?
Super Fate. It's kind of fudge.
Yeah.
Really.
And it and Traveler were the two reasons that I wanted to play this game in the first place. And I caught the Traveler influence. I know we've talked about the FFG influence and the Burning Wheel influence, but I missed the Fate as I was scanning through. Oh man.
Now you understand the armor and condition system.
Now I understand quite a bit of it.
Was stolen directly from Fate because it was the 47th system I tried. I had one point at like hit points as armor and like conditions, and then I had different types of I just was all either too complicated or just didn't do what I wanted it to do. And when I finally took these conditions and then refactored them, because one time you could have armor on the species, that didn't work. It was weird. It just didn't make any sense. So finally it came to me that the EVA suit is an armor suit. Because I used to have the EVA suit give you bonuses to stuff, and it was just overly complex. It's just an armor suit. Default stuff in armor suit. Done.
Yeah. Species with armor makes me think of like the real old like cyberpunk with like layers of art. Like it's like, oh, this is not where you want. This isn't like, you can tell this isn't where you wanted to go with it.
Well, that's one of the weirdest things about this game. It is actually also the cyberpunk genre.
Yeah.
And most people don't catch that because it's hard to pitch the fact that it's a game about science fiction in space. But it's also technically kind of cyberpunk. If you play a technician crew, you can go full cyberpunk with this. You'll be raiding corporations and stealing technology and doing the full 9 yards, shadow running it up out your yin yang and feeling like your six-sided dice belong. Like you can really do that, the technician crew.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like in terms of the themes of cyberpunk. Like, what does it mean to be a FreeSpacer who's working for these giant companies, and what does the Cardinal Compact like mean in terms of your complicity in the struggles of other people? Like that's like there's your social questions that you could really like dive into.
It's all there. It's right there.
Right.
That's the whole contractor freedom versus oppression thing is a cyberpunk theme. And it's directly in the game, and you can't remove it. It just doesn't.
Yeah, it's kind of nifty.
Yeah, I love that cyberpunk aspect. I mean, why would internet go away because we go to space? I mean, I love you, Star Trek, but where's my freaking internet? It doesn't make any sense.
So, kind of teeing off that, you had mentioned that you had a lot of various like iterations of the armor system and a lot of iterations of, various kind of sub mechanics that you dealt with. Were there any that you just really struggled with? Like, what was the hardest one of those to kind of perfect or to refine to a point that you were happy with?
Oh, that's
or that you maybe just gave up on?
There's a few things that have been kind of pulled out as. Okay, so here's one of the weirder ones. I don't know what the hardest one is. Hardest thing is probably Cold War system because it was so hard to test. Like, I started with something a little bit more like Stars Without Number, and then I actually at one point had something trying to be a little bit more like Blades in the Dark, because both the systems came out after I was already working on the Cold War idea, and I really want to do the Sandbox thing. I need to have something that simulates the background.
Yeah.
But that was a hard system, and it's still to this day done like mildly recently, like Kickstarter started and tweaks are going into it kind of thing, because you testing it requires someone else to GM, long period play, many different roles, convenience thing. Like if you look in the very version of the preview, if anybody ended up with that, it kind of accidentally said you had to roll 60 times or something. Oops. Right? Like, it wasn't supposed to say that, but if you read it, it looked like it said roll a lot of times for every single thing. And that was just kind of an oversight for not how I really meant it to play. And so I had to rewrite that like recently. That system works really well now, I think, but it's a hard system to create and a hard system to test to make sure it works. You can kind of quick iterate over it, but it's never accurate, right? It's not like a video game system where you could like get a script to run it or something. So
yeah, that's true. Did you use anything like Microscope or Kingdom or Questlandia or any of these other sort of just world building games to try to kind of like model some of that, or did you steal from any of that?
I didn't actually steal from Microscope or anything. I stole from the general idea of it, but although I backed their last Kickstarter and stuff, I haven't actually been able to play more than like a few sessions of it. And it was too open and too conversational for something that really has to have the GM be able to do it by themselves. Because bringing the players in on that just is too messy. You know what I mean?
How did you find your playtesting groups? You've talked about testing a couple of times, and I know from my own games that testing games is just a pain. And Ben and Eric are both also working on games. Ben's done several, and getting somebody else to run something when it's not entirely done, and you're like, I know this has problems. I need you to help me find them. It's a hard thing, and this system in particular can be difficult to test. I'm sure, and RPGs in general, because you have the time commitment. Did you have several groups that you would send it to, or?
No, I was never that lucky. My main other GM is actually my wife, who runs completely different than me. She just marry another person and make them GM your game.
I mean, that sounds pretty lucky to me. But,
it's just what you just got to do. You marry somebody, make them GM your game. I mean, I brought her into games and got her all the way to GMing. So she GMs differently than me, and there's lots of arguments that happen over it. And
that's what you need for a test, though. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I get to watch it because I kind of learned from Robin D. Laws. When he tests something, he doesn't really listen to what you say so much as just watching what you do, and may ask questions on why you did it. And so he can tell what's going on with you and what you do and how it reacts with the gameplay. So it's all about interpreting that. I learned that in the video game industry too. So when I saw how he did it, I was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, this works like this. He just watched everybody play, okay, and he knows exactly what's going on. Because people can't fix your problems for you. If you let them, the whole thing just goes to hell. They can tell you what problems exist, and you got to know, okay, I'm having a problem with this. What does that really mean? And then you have to Sherlock Holmes them a little bit, right? If everybody's like, this game is too easy, it's probably not as too easy. It could mean the dice mechanic is unbalanced or something else, right? It could mean all sorts of things depending on the system.
Well, especially if the players are not playing it by the rules, because then that's a whole nother subset of that same problem, right? It's like, well, you're playing it wrong, but there's a reason they're playing it wrong. And that in and of itself is also useful information. So there's like this layered playtesting thing you have to.
Totally.
Well, I do that to you guys, and it's terrible, and I feel bad about it. But I'm like, they're playing this wrong. Why are they playing this wrong? Did they not read that part, or did they not get that part? Did they not understand my writing, or did they it didn't mean what they thought it meant? Like, so it's recursively terrible, but it's hard to get out of that too, because the game's out of playtesting, really. But you still find it's now in the presentation testing. So it's like, oh, why did Eric think that? Did he read everything? Did he not read everything? Why didn't he read everything? Or if he did read everything, why didn't he understand everything? Did I say it in there for real, straight out? And I read it, kind of say it. I don't say it perfectly. Okay, got to change how this is written.
Spoilers, I'm just an adult that gets about 20% of what hits me and sticks. And then I go back again for a second coat, and then I get a little bit more, and then going again.
That is the other thing I do. Perfect segue to that. I do the changing hats. This is how I kill darlings, and this is how I can be terrible. I can be like, when you go into different phases, you're like, why did that guy make those decisions? what a jerk. And it was you, but you were wearing a different hat at the time. So you could just change those things, right? So you got to do that. So as a game designer, I expect my players and even my game masters not to get things. And I have to make my game proof to that. And that's super hard. That's probably that's next level game design. And it's why a lot of people just work with systems that are tried and true and work. Because doing that with a brand new system is really not easy. It can take you 10 years.
Right. Or not only tried and true, but this long, compared to something that has 12 or 20 subsystems, and all those subsystems exist for a reason, but they all have exponential complexity when you add them together.
Yeah, exactly.
Bug trail in video games. Look at the bug trail on every feature.
So, Blades in the Dark influence. I've got my own Blades in the Dark hack that I'm screwing around with, and one thing that I'm noticing, you have a lot of dice for the characters at the beginning of this game. Did that ever start, did it start way low and you increase to this level, or did it start at this level in the design?
There were a few different ones. It was always the idea you should get at least one die. The the big variant difference was there wasn't always specialties. Also, charge didn't always exist, which caused, when I came up with the idea for that was 3 Go plays ago or 4 Go plays ago, it came out that just getting dice directly from your equipment the same way you got them from your skills was weird. It didn't really work the way I wanted it to. It didn't emphasize science the way I wanted it to do. And it didn't really give you anything to work with. So I developed this resource system, which kept changing. But it turned into this. The other thing was, I lost the other train of thought. But yes.
Well, I love charge. So,
Yes, so do I.
Charge is amazing. Yeah. I'm glad that you've come up with that.
Yeah. There's a lot of cool, forgive the pun, but technology in this game. There's some really cool things. The trend maps, the charge, all of that, it feels really, really good. Projects, especially projects.
It's kind of sad you guys haven't got to deal with people very much, because one of the most interesting things I think is the association and contact system. Yeah. So most of the tools, to upgrade the tools, you take more upkeep and you level them up by basically buying biotech implants or, increasing the size, making your gun better, whatever it is, right? You make your multi-tool better and increase those mods. Associations are different. They're your social tools. The way you get those is during pregame, you meet somebody else. You meet a new faction. You walk in and you have a hard time dealing with the Duelan Rangers. And then next session, you automatically get 1 die in Duelan Ranger association. Boom. If you meet a Duelan Ranger who's interesting, becomes a contact of yours, you meet Dave the Duelan Ranger and engage him in conversation, you write them down as a contact, and you're going to get 2 dice in that association. And if you meet the head of the Duelan Rangers, who's super important to your missions, you can get 3, but that's super hard. So it's a quick, that sort of chart on that. But it's a completely different system. And it's just because it didn't make a lot of sense not to have a separate, I wanted to have that certain amount of abstractness, but having you upgrade association, social tools with residual value didn't make any sense. So that tweaked a few times, and I ended up having it work on the contact system. And then just, hey, you're rewarding players for gathering people they know. Mm-hmm. And I liked that idea. And I think there's going to be a lot of GMs who really like social gameplay who will like that idea too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry everybody, but I have to kind of cut it short tonight. But this was super good. I really, really, really liked hearing your insights here, Christoph, and I would love to have you back to talk more as we get in. FreeSpacer, still a Kickstarter. We got 5 days to go.
Yep. This is the last session that will be live. Well, Kickstarter's live, so this is the time to go in and type. I supported you because Eric made awesome show.
Yeah, that would be great,
Eric.
So, all right.
Or because Adam's a cool pilot, or whatever.
Yeah. No, everyone's
such a terrible captain
every day.
I have to play myself and be a better captain.
Yeah. Everyone's really here for our captain. Let's be real.
Sure.
Best.
I'm pretty sure it's Alice, though.
That's, as far as roles go, until last week, yeah.
Alice played by herself.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Then. Thanks, Christoph, and everybody.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody. We're going to get out of here. Bye.
Bye.